Kia ora. Kia ora and greetings, everybody.
Did it snow?
No, it didn't snow. It rained on the west coast. This is my trip. On Thursday, I'm going down to pick my car up, which is still in the Ida Valley.
Oh, nice.
That's what driving old cars is all about. But I'd really like to welcome a really, really important person in my life, Rotty, and anyone who had anything to do with my office. Rotty was in charge, and her name's Linda, but she's always called Rotty. And I introduced her to a new accountant at the council, and I said, "This is Rotty." And he said, he was still in the polite phase, he said, "Sorry, I missed your name." She said, "Rot Wheeler." So Rotty and I worked together for 9 years in the office, and we're very proud of the fact we had a team and we never had a single change in 9 years. And it was a really great office. And one thing I remember, one time Pam occasionally came in for our team meetings on Monday, and when I got home she said, "You should be bloody ashamed of yourself." And I said, "Why is that?" And she said, "The way you and Rotty talk to each other is disgusting." And we're both Irish, of course. So anyway, I went back next day and I said to Barbara, "Pam said Rotty and I were badly behaved yesterday." And she said, "You're always badly behaved." So I said to Rotty, "Pam says we're badly behaved." And she said, "What do you mean?" But it's great to see her husband Al here, who's been working for United Nations, is it? Yeah. Around the world and in trouble spots around the world. So how long are you here in Christchurch?
5 days.
Oh, what a shame. I could have lined you up for Tuesday Club, because the area that you've been working in is hazardous, to say the least. But anyway, it's great to see you here. Right. So we've got the director of the Art Centre. It sounds a lot more important than it is. And his chair. Welcome, madam. But it's such an important facility in the city. And when you think about what started there and who came out of that place, it's a pretty important place. And the other really interesting thing was that the group of people that actually saved those buildings, when the Ministry of Education were of a mind to hand it back to the city. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get to that stage again? So, Philip, it's wonderful to have you here. And I'm sure you will entertain us. His PowerPoint is his tongue. And so, he's not good with computers, so that's fine. So, lovely to have you. Away you go.
Thank you. I don't know, do I? I probably don't.
Yes,
Yes, I do.
Huge amount of deafness in this group.
Well, thank you, Gary. Thank you. It's good to be back with the Tuesday Club. I'm getting rather hesitant because I think I do a lot of public speaking, or I used to. And I was speaking somewhere recently, and a slight knock to my confidence, because I was speaking to this group, and I thought it had gone rather well. And afterwards, the secretary of this group came up and said, "Do you have any expenses?" And I said, "No, thank you. That's not necessary." And he said, "Oh, good. That's good, because we sometimes we get speakers who don't take the expenses, and so we take the money and we put it into a special fund so we can afford better speakers."
We should do that, Gary.
There's an idea.
We'll pass that round.
So the generation of this conversation began with with Gary talking about Paul Callaghan a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago probably now. And of course, Paul Callaghan, as you know, was a world-leading scientist, physicist specializing in nanotechnology. And he was really much more than that for us. He was hugely inspirational, and a great speaker, and a great teacher. And he championed science and business and innovation as being crucial to the country's growth. And his wish was for New Zealanders to get more value and return from their ingenuity by combining science and innovation and, critically, commercialization. And his vision was that we would be a hub of smart, export-focused entrepreneurs where a high-quality lifestyle is achieved through excellence in education and research and development. So why am I a director of the Arts Centre, an actor, a musician, an arts administrator here talking...
And a banker. And a banker.
Banker, did you say? Well, in the arts, we are innovative and provocative, and yes, I was also in one period of my life I fell in with a bad lot and became a banker, and worked in corporate finance and worked in. Particularly in technology, and about 99% of our work was in technology, and about half of that was in healthcare technology. There is a link here. Paul Callaghan said, "To solve the massive crises facing us, we must be innovative. We must be collaborative, mission-oriented thinking, while also bringing a stakeholder view of public-private partnerships, which means not only taking risks together, but also sharing the rewards." And he gave us 5 criteria, which Gary referenced, for missions, which are to be bold and inspirational with wide societal relevance. Secondly, to have a clear direction, targeted, measurable, and time-bound. Thirdly, be ambitious but realistic with research and innovation actions. And fourthly, be cross-disciplinary, cross-sectoral, and cross-actor innovation. I could do that bit. And fifth, to drive multiple bottom-up solutions. So all that informs something that we are in the process of doing at the Arts Centre. But before I go any further, I just want to talk about the Arts Centre, Te Matati ki te Ora. And we all have connections with the Arts Centre, whether it be through ballet or theatre or beer or crafts or bands or vegetarian food or the markets. And some of those memories, for many of us, were formative moments, either as students or as young people or at the court or the Academy cinemas or at Fudge Cottage or the Ducks. I should think someone in this room probably had their first beer at the Ducks, or had their first band at the Ducks, or had their first kiss at the Ducks. Some of them all on the same night. It is the Arts Centre of Christchurch. It is the very fabric of our society, and I like to think of it as our village hall, which is why, to put it into context too, the process that's going on at the moment with the long-term plan and the proposal to include funding for the Arts Centre is so critical, not only to the Arts Centre per se, but to the community. And that proposal is to give a capital grant to the Arts Centre, which will literally give us survival for the next 3 years, and will also allow us to complete 2 more buildings. So the context of that is, of course, the earthquakes, the rebuild, the restoration, and with this funding, we will get complete 20 of 22 stone buildings. And when you go back to 2012, and when they were scoping the project, it was a $290 million project with 168 million of insurance payout. So to actually have got to this stage and to have been able to achieve 20 out of 22 is quite a remarkable achievement for all those that did it before I got there. So that's us and our memories. But what the trustees are focused on now is, of course, the future. It's no longer about us. It's about not even our children, it's our children's children and their children. And what does that mean for these buildings in that context? What does it mean? What does an art centre in the latter part of the 21st century look like? And how will it be used? And I doubt it will be different to how we have experienced it, and others will have different memories and different formative experiences there. And there was one absolutely critical change that's happened in the last few years, and that was the Act of Parliament that was passed in 2015. And that reconstituted the Arts Centre, certainly in terms of governance, and it took the Constitution and reiterated the mission statement, which is to foster, promote, facilitate, and encourage the interest of art, culture, and education. And it added one word, one really critical, interesting word, creativity, which you would have thought is implicit in arts. But they've deemed it necessary to add it. So the trustees have spent some time since then looking at that. What does it mean? What does it mean in terms of how we curate this centre for the future? And one critical difference that we identified was that not only were they seeking to broaden the remit of the word arts, and part of that is generated from a sort of reductive, utterly false interpretation of the word arts in a sort of tabloid narrative that arts is a bad thing and elitist. So I think creativity seeks to broaden that, and broadening it is good. So the broadening that we've looked at also for us incorporates entrepreneurship and technology and innovation. So how do we then incorporate that literally into the fabric of the centre? Then to jump forward, last year, Colin Ansell, who sat next to Felicity here, walked into my office and said, "You should have a technology centre at the Arts Centre." And I was too polite to say that we'd already thought of it, but we hadn't done anything. We got to talking. And he pointed out, of course, that we have a lot of the assets of a technology park already at the Arts Centre. If you were building a technology park in a brownfield or even a greenfield site, you would want to give it the assets of hospitality, of cafes, of restaurants, of wine bars. Ideally, you'd probably have some meeting venues, some conference centres, maybe even a lecture theatre, or all of those things that we already have at the Arts Centre. So, enter stage left Colin. Colin's a man who's had 30 years in commercialising biotechnology companies in New Zealand and agri-tech companies. And we started to discuss this whole technology idea and very quickly realised that actually if we were to do anything like this, rather than be all things to all men, we'd be better to define it to a particular sector. And the physical proximity to the health precinct, of course, very quickly led us to looking at health technology companies. We're on the edge of Te Papahoa, literally across the river. It's walkable, and those the assets of the health precinct are immense. I mean, we've heard a lot about the disagreements between the DHB and and the ministry. We've heard them in this forum, and it's been an amazing journey. What we don't hear, or I didn't hear, is actually the degree of excellence that exists within the DHB. The Canterbury GHB is, according to an outfit in the UK, a think tank called the King's Fund, the 5th highest ranked DHB or equivalent in the world. Talking to David Murdoch, so I've got to meet all sorts of interesting people outside of the arts through this project. David Murdoch, the Dean of the Otago Medical School, was talking to us, and he said, apropos of nothing, David's an immensely accomplished man. He's an immunologist, he's Dean of the school, but he's worked all over the world, and he sits on the advisory board of the Oxford vaccine. He's internationally renowned, and he said, apropos of nothing, if I had to be unwell anywhere in the world, I would choose it to be Canterbury, because the degree of excellence in the clinicians here is outstanding. And we should hear that story more often.
Tell the Ministry of Health.
Yes. So, what we started looking at, Colin's got a background in investment banking. I've had some experience in that area. We started looking at the sector and seeing if we could see any gaps. And of course, what we've been quite good at, although not as good as some places overseas, but we've been quite good at funding research. And there are plenty of research centres and innovation centres around the country. What we have been rather less good at as a country is developing the commercialisation of the companies that emerge from those innovation centres. And yes, exactly, we give it away. What happens is that we offshore all these assets. We've got a fairly undeveloped financial sector, which isn't really fit for purpose for servicing these large amounts of emerging companies. So inevitably, when you're growing a cash-hungry business, which a lot of these are, you have to look for that capital, and that capital tends to be more readily available overseas. So it's quite natural to go and find that capital, and then all that our research, our talent is offshored. So what we've devised is a model to have a cluster of these companies in health technology. And health technology is an overarching umbrella that covers medtech and biotech and digitech, which sort of links everything, and have them cluster together in the 2 next buildings that we will develop at the Arts Centre. One of them is the largest building on site, which is currently earthquake strengthened, but this additional funding from the council will allow us to finish it and get that occupied, and an adjacent building. And gloriously, those are 2 of the 4 engineering schools. So the link with science and technology, the history of science at the Arts Centre at Canterbury University is an exquisite part of the story. Professor Scott, who was the founding dean of the engineering school, his office will be a part of this. It looks into the North Quad. It's the most delightful place to be, as you all know. And that in itself is a distinctive feature for a company who might want to be part of this. Because one of the challenges in the sector is, of course, attracting and retaining talent. To be in an environment with your peers, learning from them is one aspect of it. But over and beyond that, the health technology quadrant at the Arts Centre aims to provide a level of expertise, which we have in the country, as assets available to these companies. So the way that this will be structured is a subsidiary company, it's a charitable company owned by the Arts Centre, so the ultimate beneficiary is the Arts Centre, will run the quadrant. To join the quadrant and gain the benefits of this, the advice that's wrapped around it, which addresses issues that you don't know you've got when you're developing a company. And I saw this frequently when I was working in corporate finance with early stage companies. You do not know what you do not know. So the critical strategic moments of growth and decision making as you advance, and often these are rapidly growing enterprises, will have access to these high level of expertise from people who have done it, who've got experience of it, and are there to advise. So to remove these barriers and these trip points, and commercialize these companies. And critically, part of that will be the financial advice around it. So at those critical moments of strategic growth, there will be people there advising in advance of it, reaching those moments, deciding what is the appropriate level. Is international capital the right way to go? Maybe it is, but what's the best deal? And so retaining high value jobs, talent, all that research investment in New Zealand for as long as possible. We're not against international capital. We need it, but there are moments when it may be too cheap or too early, and we aim to remove those. So it's a solution of creating. It's almost like a marriage bureau as well, of entrepreneurs, of ideas, of emerging companies, companies that might be in transition, where the founder actually may not be the right person to be taking the company through to the next stage. So introducing to entrepreneurs, and also international expertise, and creating an economic powerhouse of which the beneficiary will principally be the city. High value jobs, high value companies, and also a centre of excellence that will attract companies from elsewhere in the country to come and be part of it too. Because the centre can also be virtual. It's also the physical centre of it at the Arts Centre, but the relationships can be managed virtually as well. So we hope that it'll be a magnet for companies coming to the city, and as such a significant infrastructure project for the city. The health sector itself is a $7 trillion global economy, and 10% of global GDP is in the health sector. And we've obviously got a tiny part of that, but there's an outfit called the New Zealand Tech Investment Network. And in 2019, they estimated that the sector in New Zealand was worth just over $2 billion, growing at $1 billion a year. So this is going to be a really significant part of the economy for the next 20 years. So initially it's a cluster of companies. We need public funding to get us beyond that. We're looking at companies in revenue. So we're not looking to compete with all the existing infrastructure in the company of innovation centres that already exist in the universities and the DHB and elsewhere, and providing those various parts of strategic advice around pathway to market, around IP, around regulatory issues, and companies that want to come and join this would have to contribute 5% of their equity to the scheme. Now that means there's no cash going out of the business, but there are several elements to this, because if you are smart enough to realize that giving up 5% of your equity to achieve this level of interest and advice and advancement, if you're smart enough to do that, then you're the sort of company we want to talk to, and we are now in partnership. So we are invested with you in that and want the company to advance just as you do. In the long term, if we get one unicorn, we will have funded the Arts Centre. So that comes back to the arts and the cross-sectoral innovative way of thinking. So where will all this happen? Well, in the glorious Gothic Revival quads at the Arts Centre, in the engineering schools with those historic scientific connections and engineering associations that I've mentioned, and of course in Otatahi, which is the perfectly formed small city for connectivity. So, and just starting a project like this in an area, in this city, I have my background in health technology is unknown, but I've been able to pick up the phone and talk to someone like the dean of the school. And get a meeting. It's that sort of level of connectivity which is not easily available in a larger centre, and we need to take those things and use them to our advantage. And of course, it's an affordable city. It's a place where companies are likely to relocate for lifestyle and affordability. We've also got some strategic alignments. The health Te Papa Hauora, the health precinct itself, they're the partners that they have given us funding for the business case, as has Christchurch NZ. One of the interesting things about talking to you today and talking to this forum and talking to the city through this forum is, of course, that to do this, we need a united front as a city, because we will be making the case for public funding, and we need the entire city to be behind it. So it's delightful to have the support of Te Papa Hauora and their constituents and their shareholders at the Canterbury University, Otago University Medical School, the DHB, and ARA. So they are behind us, and to have Christchurch NZ's funding for the business case as well is critical. So that gives us a good united front locally. Internationally, we've got linkages well established. Colin brings a huge network to this, and so we're tapping into that with linkages with Cambridge and with Melbourne, with Tel Aviv. And our aim is to actually create a step change in the sector, and then by doing this, attract the interests of multinationals. Multinationals, it's not unknown for them to drop in significant tens of millions, 100 million, 200 million, into innovation centres around the world. And if that were to happen, then we might be able to restore the last two buildings. I hope that what I'm describing, going back to Paul Callaghan's 5 criteria, I hope what you're hearing is bold and innovative, that it's got a clear direction, that it is realistic, it is cross-disciplinary and cross-sectoral, and will drive multiple bottom-up solutions. And we hope that Paul Callaghan would like it. That is the Health Tech Quadrant at the Arts Centre, and we'd love to take questions.
Very exciting.
The difficult woman on the left, Margaret.
She is not going to be difficult whatever. Do you know, Philip, there is one person who, hearing you tonight, would be utterly overjoyed, and that's Paul Callaghan. He truly would have. Now, there is one person on this earth who is still alive that you have to get on board, and that is Martin Lord Rees, former Master of Trinity College, Astronomer Royal, and also President of the Royal Society London.
Do you know anyone who knows him, Mark?
Possibly you. Do you know the last formal function that Paul attended before he died, a month before he died, was to be the guest of Martin at Trinity College, and we all sat at the top table. It was extraordinary, and I have no doubt whatever that Martin would come on board with glee.
Oh, wonderful.
Excellent. And Margaret will organise it. Right.
Yeah, I've got him on email.
Right, that's great, and that's precisely what you need. Right, questions? Rosemary.
I'm interested in the idea of collaboration and competition, and how they will manage that. Because I think we see them as opposites, but in fact they can be brought together. But how do you manage it in an environment like that where innovation is money?
That's a very good question. I think what's fascinating about if I can refer to us broadly as our generation and younger generations, that they've got a completely different attitude. And I think the competitive elements, I think we were brought up much more with that than they are. They're eager to, for these open platforms.
Open source.
Open source, absolutely, in a way that is quite strange to some of our generation. And I think the best we can do is just facilitate, not try and direct. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to do is just create the opportunity and get out of the way. Because I don't. There are those that see it as particularly when you come to public funding and the limited pool of public funding. There are those that view another initiative as just a bloody pain in the arse that's going to take away my funding. Just got to let them get on with that.
And have you got anybody ready to sign up?
We've got a lot of interest. The buildings are still being designed, and it'll take us a year to build them and complete them. But yes, we've just begun to sort of reach out, and yes, happily, a lot of interest.
Cool.
What we haven't got is the funding for the quadrant. What we've got is buildings that we can let, so we can cluster companies and start it off in that way. But it won't be the quadrant. That will take some funding.
You reminded me of something that Bruce Irvine, when he came here, spoke about, where he's working with a lot of younger companies, and he's saying that our generation of company directors wanted to run the companies themselves, and there's a new generation coming through that don't. The founders will stand back and actually allow other people to become the CEO because they are interested in the innovation, which was quite interesting. But when you think in the city, and Margaret will have known this person really well, of Angus Tate, who a whole lot of businesses grew off that man's business because he nurtured them.
Yeah.
So he would kick somebody out of the nest and say, here's some funding, go away and do it. And I've got a number of friends who are very well off now, and they were engineers who worked under Angus Tate. I always loved the story of Angus Tate, that his first company fell over completely, dramatically. And when he went back to his bank manager, when the bank managers were bank managers, and the bank manager said, I hope you're not going to repeat the same mistakes as you made last time. And he said, oh no, I've got a whole lot of new ones. Right, question. Rotty.
I haven't got a question, I'd just like to say something. Thank you so much for saying this. But this is not for us so much as for the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. That is so important. And it's important also to point that out to prospective funders and naysayers and short-term thinkers. And if they're grandparents, they can't really argue against that. So thank you for saying that. It's lovely to hear that, because you don't often hear it much. It's often short-term satisfaction or profit or whatever it is. Yeah.
You're ruining the Rottweiler reputation.
I got old.
Her teeth have gone soft. All right.
I understand that here in Christchurch we're very fortunate in that people working in medical research have good access to clinicians and patients to do trials, and also the legislation to support that. Have you thought about how you can maximise that with what you're doing?
To maximise, sorry.
Maximise the linkages into the clinicians and people who can trial the...
Yeah, no, very much. I think it is part of that connectivity of the physical proximity, and leveraging all the assets of the clinicians, of the DHB, of the universities, And there are many others making those linkages anyway. And that's happened within the DHB with VIRE innovations. So I think this just aims to build on all those assets and those connections and others that have already done the hard work now.
Right.
I mean, you know David Murdoch pretty well. One of the things that the Otago University specialising in is sort of around, well, aspects of blood disease, for example. There are countries looking for research opportunities in that area, and there are Kiwis in key positions overseas, for example in the Middle East, who are in charge of things such as pension funds, and they are looking for investment. And there's one I was involved with where things were going okay until the massacre. And I think there's a resource out there which you'll be aware of. I mean, Kiwis in key positions in charge of money looking to invest it.
Yep.
And that'd be a key resource and a good to tap into.
Yeah.
And to make those connections with the research they need. So, for example, in some countries in the Middle East, you've got blood disorders through various reasons, and a university here who probably may have some expertise in researching. And so there's an exchange there.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is an aggressively commercial model under the auspices of a charitable trust. We do want to aggressively commercialize these companies, and within that, of course, is a whole heap of commercial opportunity. So yes, the attraction for fund managers will be key, and we've also have early stage conversations about actually establishing our own fund around the quadrant to facilitate that investment.
One of the groups that Linda and I worked with was Kiwi Expatriates Abroad, Kia. And Kia people are everywhere, and they are, many of them are really keen to actually come back and assist New Zealand, and it would be worth talking to Kia, which still does exist.
Yes, good idea.
To actually see who is, like what Ivan's saying, who's in this area who may be able to bring either money or research or connections or a market.
Yep.
Which is, again, is really important.
Yeah, but I think the timing is great because we can leverage off the brain gain that we're experiencing at the moment.
How did you get here?
I don't know.
Acting.
Yeah, he was a terrible actor. Right, questions. Come on.
In good old NIMBY Christchurch, will there be a sort of backlash from some people about some of the arts centre being taken up by what is going to be a commercial enterprise? Is that an issue?
I don't think so. I mean, the Arts Centre is, as you know, we have to survive on the rent that we can get from the tenancies. So this is just moving into a different area. But as I spoke about, creativity and entrepreneurship.
Creativity is the word.
Yes. Even so, it doesn't pay the bills. The cost of running those historic buildings is always higher than the income that we can get from it. But I think what it does is just broaden us into another area of the community. So the trustees, we're all fully behind this as a legitimate interpretation of our mission.
If I could just add to that, as the chair of the Arts Centre, the trustees have long ago, even before I joined the board, determined that there would be 3 core tenancies of the Arts Centre that would fund all the other tenancies, the arts ones that can't afford so much money and all that sort of thing. One was the University of Canterbury, which has its music school there. The second one was to be a hotel, which will be opened in the middle of next year on time and on budget, I would add. And the third one we didn't know. The third one we've been desperately searching for, and we hope that this will be it. So that's how the trustees have always hoped and planned and aimed for constant funding of an arts centre that has actually never paid its way. Has always relied on council funding, and for the last 3 years we haven't had any. It was cut. We don't know why, and so now it looks like it will be resumed. We've got about 2 weeks to go before we find out, and if it is, then our future will be secure, and this will secure the third part of the funding.
One of the things we often hear from our funders is, which are grant-making trusts as well as public funds, is that in the community sector and in the arts sector, and you really need to be more innovative. Think about this again. What else can you do? How can you do it differently? I recently went back to see one of the funders and said, I've got a scheme. It's quite innovative. And they went, this is fantastic. This is exactly what we want you to do. It's a bit much for us.
Brilliant. If it's any sort of consolation, the external advisory group, which looked at the council finances, one of the people on it was the one that wrote the act, and we pushed very, very, very hard for the Arts Centre in our report. I'm sure we've been redacted out of the report. John.
Yeah, I'm just thinking as you're speaking there. Sure how to put this. I'm an old builder from the 1800s, and you talk about what you talk about, it's great, but it's just thinking about the space. It's the buildings that's there that we should be pushing more to the public. That there's not a lot of that sort of building in New Zealand for a start. And the buildings itself, they're works of art. And I think maybe it's a good idea to, I don't know if you do it, but I was just thinking there, like the stonemasonry there. People doesn't know about stonemasonry, you just show them, and the wonderful, a building, you've got the walls and you've got the roof. That's what they're more, that's the structure, that's the engineering. All buildings are, but that they've got the beauty of the stonemasons. It's just absolutely wonderful. The carpenters doesn't just put a stair in or put a door frame in. They're done beautiful with the mouldings and the architraves and the staircases just to get you from that floor to that floor. But look at some of them staircases, how they were done, and it's a complete piece of art in its own right. And I don't know what you're doing, whether you're telling people this or most people doesn't notice. They go in and they're talking about all the stuff you put. If you put these out, people get, oh yeah, I didn't notice that.
And we've taken great pleasure over the restoration in actually inviting the public in and getting them to meet the stonemasons who are working on the project. And if you go to any of the heritage events, we just had a big one across the city. We took part in that and actually had one of the masons there to talk to the public throughout the day and explain about all their work.
I'll catch up eventually.
He's just caught up from the 19th century. David.
Do you think if we didn't have the Arts Centre, that would this go ahead anywhere? Or is it the Arts Centre the sort of this?
Oh yeah, there's no reason the concept couldn't work anywhere. The advantage that we've got, and that we're ahead of any other proposal, because we've got the extraordinary beauty of the Arts Centre, which puts us head and shoulders above anyone else, and we've got all the assets of a technology park already there. So I mean, it makes it fairly easy from that point of view. But you're quite right, do it. So, I mean, there are technology parks all over the world, usually glass and steel.
The innovation precinct.
Beautiful. Peter.
Yeah, I was just following on from John, really, and the whole thing. I think this is just brilliant. And it's just kind of, when you look at the story of the Arts Centre and what it was before, part of university and all the rest of it, this is a logical extension and growth out of all those things. You see, it's like all the stars have come into place for this. And it's amazing and brilliant. And John, one of the things I had a joy doing when I was on the council was to go around before you were part of it, with, what was his name? Andre, who was showing us, the councillors, what work was being done and how a whole lot of stuff that had been covered over over the years has now been reopened up again. So you could actually see its astonishing beauty. I took some friends into the Great Hall at the weekend. Oh my God, that's a beautiful building. And all this stuff that you're talking about, which is going to, in a sense, ensure on both survival and prosperity of our village hall, our city's village hall, is just great. It's just great. And everything comes together in that way. I think the stars were aligned.
And it invites in another part of the community into our centre.
Sure.
It's great.
Yeah, that's what I was saying before. It doesn't matter how beautiful a building is, if it's not being used.
Yes, exactly.
You know,
Yes.
it's gotta be the box,
Yes.
you know.
Agreed.
Margaret.
But Philip, what you're capitalising on is an initiative which is happening all over the world, and that is the realisation that the sciences and the humanities depend upon each other and
Yes.
contribute
Absolutely.
to each other.
Absolutely. Totally.
Yeah, agreed. I'll drink to that.
So will I.
The downside, of course, is that if we can't pull this off in its entirety, then there will be two buildings in the Arts Centre fronting on Worcester Boulevard that will be propped and mothballed for the foreseeable future.
We won't let it do that.
Not,
But the other thing too is, and this is not being the prophet of doom, but I've just not long been in Italy a year or so ago, and they mothball a building if they can't actually fund it straight away, and they leave it there for 50 years because they say the building's really precious and we're not going to pull it down. And we didn't do enough of that. And that the fact that the Arts Centre was saved is congratulations to all you trustees and your forebears. But it was a really, really important thing that pulled down all the old dungers, didn't prevail at the Arts Centre.
well, I can assure you it won't be pulled down, but it'll be really sad to walk down Worcester Boulevard every day and just see the fences still up.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree, and I'm sure that won't be that. But the other thing too is, with what was it Henry Ford said, without a knowledge of history, you're bound to repeat it. But you think Lord Rutherford started his first education
Exactly.
on that site, and look what he did, and that's the sort of thing that you need to be promoting. Now, did you say Colin? Colin, would you like to say anything? You obviously played a key role.
My arm. There's
Two Collins.
Not you.
It's not Colin Burke.
No. Colin here. Colin Ansell. Colin is the brains behind all this. I'm just the good-looking one that fronts it.
Fall back on the nice bloke.
No, I mean, I think Philip and Felicity have covered up most of it. I think that the one thing that Philip hasn't perhaps said, which is probably blindingly obvious to everybody in this room, but came as a complete surprise to me, having worked in agricultural biotech and overseas in different areas, is the amount of talent in Canterbury and the amount of expertise in Canterbury. It is quite phenomenal. And it panders slightly to what David Murdoch says, but if I look at the level of expertise in agricultural biotechnology, and also then in finance separately in London and elsewhere, where you expect the skills and expertise to be of the highest nature. And you look at what you've got in Canterbury, not only from a communication point of view, but also in a spirit of communication, but also the skills. It is quite outstanding, and it's on a global basis. And it's something that we take for granted, but it is there, and it's very important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and in fact, what you said before, Philip, you pick up the phone to the Dean of the Med School, and they're there.
Yeah.
But one of the things, I was just working with a group of people last week, and we were talking about, we've been involved in a number of sectors, but we said that one of the things that we take for granted in the city is that we collaborate naturally.
Yes.
And that there's an amazing crossing over of knowledge and skills, and people that care about the city. They're tribal as hell. I used to always say when I left the city as mayor, I was the mayor of the South Island. I was there to actually represent the whole island, and that I felt great ease with actually saying, don't forget Greymouth, or don't forget, you know, Anangahua, or don't forget, you know, whatever. And I think that one of the things that we should be saying around a project like this is the place where collaboration happens naturally. And I think, Colin, you've reminded me of that. But any other questions or comments, or Aaron?
It's a question around coordination and communication. So all these fantastic people and groups, are they talking to each other? Is this and again a question to the room, does Christchurch New Zealand have a role in kind of coordinating that? Are they doing it? Should they be doing it? If they're not doing it, why the hell aren't they? Instead of just doing, you know, $1 million 30-second commercials saying, you know, come and visit here, you know, for the weekend.
It's a
bit of a
loaded question.
just say yes. So
Yes.
say yes and no, and
Yeah.
what can an organisation like Christchurch New Zealand do apart from just funding a business case for this?
And they are
should
very
they be
active.
doing?
Yes.
Should they be doing more?
I think that they are doing a lot, and that there are lots of industry organisations too who are working on that, and plenty of fora for all those different groups to meet. Yes, I'm sure they can always
Fantastic.
All right.
Yeah.
Philip, I think this is it's inspiring what you're talking about. And a year or two ago, when we met and you wept into your beer about where the hell the next money's going to come from, it's great to hear the creativity that we expected of you, that we saw at the Court Theatre and places like that, and that your mojo's back, and that was the mojo that, like, you think about the role that this incredibly talented man ran at the Court Theatre, and able to use that same creativity and knowledge and connections. It's pretty exciting. So thank you so much. That's wonderful.